Good morning. I'm Randy Becker, and I'm going to be your historical tour guide this morning. Take you on part of your journey of 200 years. You're in the midst of a month of such celebrations. Can you imagine in 1825 they'd think you'd be here? That this congregation would still be here? Well, we'll talk about that. And what I presented for you this morning is an order of service that would have been typical down there at the Church of Reconciliation, Universalist Unitarian, on Oneida Square in about 1959 or 1960. And I have a sort of a assignment for you this morning, and that is, as we go through this order of service, I want you to notice what's missing. What's missing that you would now expect here on a Sunday morning. And when we get to the end, after the closing hymn and before the benediction, we'll talk about what you think wasn't there then that is here now. And we'll have chances to do all that then. So welcome. Glad that you're here. Glad that we are here together. Glad that we're able to be with one another. Come into this space. Come into this space that is made special by us. You know, this is just wood in the walls and plasterboard and folding chairs and carpet. But what makes this place special is each of us. So bring yourself, bring your life story, bring your life questions, bring your whole being into this time and space, and we will connect. We'll connect with people from 200 years ago, from 150 years ago, from 100 years ago, from 50 years ago, and maybe you'll find yourself along the way. So come, let us worship together in that spirit of being totally and wholly here, not as someone else would wish us to be, but as we know ourselves. And we'll begin with a hymn, number 38 in the hymnal, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden's ablaze. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
That's right. Before Cat Stevens sang it, Unitarian Universalists were singing it, and there we are. I want to take you back to 1825, and those people were deciding to form a Universalist church here in Utica. There were others in the general area, but they wanted to form here, and the question is, what should we say about ourselves? And what they could do was look to the general profession of faith that the Universalist Church of America had. They had met at Winchester, New Hampshire in 1803, and they debated. Yeah, they were Universalists. They debated at length, and then finally worked out a statement they all could accept. But we'll see how much of it we might accept today. Article the first. We believe that the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament contain a revelation of the character of God and of the duty, interest, and final destination of man. Article the second. We believe that there is only one God whose nature is love, revealed in one Lord Jesus Christ, who by the Holy Spirit of grace, who will finally restore the whole family of mankind to holiness and happiness. Article the third. We believe that holiness and true happiness are inseparably connected, and that believers ought to be careful to maintain order and practice good works, for these things are good and profitable unto men. But then they added something more. Yet while we adopt a general profession of faith, we leave it to the several churches and societies and smaller associations of churches, if they should be formed, within the limits of our general association, to continue or adopt within themselves such more articles of faith as may appear to them best under their particular circumstances, provided they do not disagree with our general profession of faith. And while we consider that every church possesses within itself all the powers of self-government, we earnestly and effectively recommend it to every church, society, and particular association to exercise the spirit of Christian meekness and charity to those whose modes of faith and practice, that where brethren cannot see alike, they may agree to differ, and let every man be persuaded in his own mind. 1803. Those last two paragraphs are what got to be known as the Liberty Clause, which will be carried through from 1803 until 2023 adoption. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But I invite you right now to join with me in some words of Walt Whitman. It's number 659 in the hymnal. The sum of all known reverence. And I'll read the main passage, and if you would respond in the indented or italicized or whatever otherwise marked portion. The sum of all known reverence I add up in you, whoever you are. All architecture is what you do to it when you look upon it. The sun and stars that float in the open air, the apple-shaped earth, and we upon it. The wonder everyone sees and everyone else they see, and the wonders that fill each minute of time forever. We consider Bibles and religions divine. I do not say they are not divine. I say they have grown out of you and may grow out of you still. Will you seek afar off? You'll surely come back at last in things best known to you, finding the best or as good as the best. The sum of all known reverence I add up in you, whoever you are. So we're moving from 1803 to 2023, and the most recent iteration of the discussion about why Unitarians and Universalists and Universalist Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists and all the like-minded might associate with each other. And after years of discussion and years of argument and more years of discussion, the bylaws were amended in 2023 to these, not as brief as they were in 1803. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, congregation to congregation and through our association, to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that binds us, holds us together, and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, the values are these: interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and passionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity. We declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Our inspirations. For our inspiration, we look to direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder as primary sources of Unitarian Universalism. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. We draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Inclusion. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregation that truly welcomes all persons who shares our value. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. Freedom of belief. Congregational freedom and the individual right of conscience are central to Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union, so long as they do not require their members to adhere to a particular creed. Statement of our values, our commitments, our covenant with each other from 2023 and in through this year. The readings from this morning. Let us gather together in a silent moment, setting aside anything you have to do, letting go of business and obligations, listening for that small, still voice inside. Listening for what the universe is posing as a question to you this morning. Listening for what your heart and mind in harmony is offering as an answer this morning. Who are you? What are you becoming? How will you share who you are so that others may live more fully? Into the silence of your own thoughts, we commit ourselves. May we remember that if we leave from this hour here together and nothing has changed, what was the point of this hour together? But if in some large or small measure we find renewed or new commitment to the values we share, then it will have been time well spent together. Blessed be. One thing that has not changed in this congregation in the time that I've known it, there's always been a time for an offering. But actually, when we got here early this morning, my wife Jane and I got here early, people were already in here offering. Melissa was offering music and practicing. Barb was getting things in the kitchen going. People are offering things all the time. They're offering things here to this community. They're offering things in this larger Utica community. They're going out from this place and saying to others, we can be more loving, we can be more inclusive, we can be more caring. In many ways, the offering we take of gifts out of our lives is just symbolic of all those other offerings we make in the week. And so at this time, our offering is received as we think about all those other things we give to the world beyond ourselves. And now a chance to sing again. Hymn number 139 in the hymnal. Wonders still the world shall witness.
Wonders still the world shall witness, never known in days of old, never dreamed by ancient sages, howsoever free and bold. Sons and daughters shall inherit wondrous sorts to us unknown, when the dawn of peace its splendor over all the world has thrown. They shall rule with winged freedom, worlds of health and human good, worlds of commerce, worlds of science, all made one and understood. They shall know a world transfigured, which our eyes would dimly see. They shall make its towns and woodlands beautiful from sea to sea. For a spirit then shall move them, we but vaguely apprehend. Aims magnificent and holy, making joy and labor friend. Then shall bloom in song and fragrance, harmony of thought and deed, fruits of peace and love and justice, where today we plant the seed.
As some of you know, I grew up in this congregation. I grew up when it was in that building down on Oneida Square. I was just talking with the two humans about it, that, the stories we could tell out of that. It was an interesting building because it incorporated a stained glass window that came out of the old building, the one that had the tree in the steeple. And there were a few other relics that were in there. What started out in 1907 in that building, by the time you people left it in the 70s, it had been transformed greatly. Pews stopped being in rigid format, but were in circles. So much change. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk change. We're going to talk about this congregation's 200-year history and what those people must have been thinking or doing or daring for we to be here now at 200 years. So I want to take you back to 1825. You know, it's just a couple of weeks ago that Governor DeWitt Clinton went by in the Seneca Chief opening the Erie Canal. Remember that? Were you down there? Just down beyond Bag Square? Yeah, really. Amazing. In this age, the world became larger. The Erie Canal opened up all of that western land. It was the transformation of the age. Up until then, most of whom had lived in this area had come from either foreign lands where they were not welcomed, or they'd come over from Connecticut and Massachusetts where they were equally unwelcome. This was a land of heathens. Let's just put it that way. This was a land of people who lived out on their own, thought their own thoughts, did their own things, didn't want to live too close to anybody. You know, Utica wasn't much of a city in those days, but most of the people in this area were living outside of it. But with the opening of the canal, not only did trade flow, not only did people flow, but also certain ideas flowed. And one of the big ones that came through this area was that these heathens out here, that this prairie land that's beyond, that this new world that was opening needed to be won for a certain understanding of religion. And so evangelical preachers came in and created what was known as the burnt over district. There were so many preachers and so much preaching and so much hellfire. It was a crisp, burned area. So picture into that atmosphere in which every day newcomers were arriving on packet boats, and with them came the messages of don't go forward, go backwards in religion. A group of people decided to do something different. They dared to start a Universalist church here in Utica. And it wasn't just they started a church like every other church. Of course, the Universalists, we read that profession of faith. You look closely at it, look at what it's saying. It doesn't say that the Bible is the Word of God. It says it's a record. There are many others. It doesn't say that there'll be damnation, but rather that there will be reconciliation in the end. It doesn't say you have to recite a specific creed. In fact, you're not allowed to have a specific creed. Even if you're Universalist, you don't have to ascribe to the Universalist creed. And you know what the Utica Universalists did? They didn't ascribe to that one. They created their own. They said the one we want here will be of our making, not something that happened back in 1803 in New Hampshire. They created a congregation of their own making. And as they incorporated, as they took on members, there were women who were full-fledged members of that congregation, 1825, full-fledged voting members of a church. How do you think that went down in 1825 Utica? How would it go down in 2025 Utica? But they created that congregation that was welcoming and inclusive. Yes, within their own time, as welcoming, as inclusive as it could be. But they strove to be the kind of place where someone could come on Sunday morning and going forth feel better for having been there. As contrasting with many churches that you were sorry you went because when you went out, you felt much worse. A place of assurance, a place of love, a place of possibility, a place where maybe wonders still will be witnessed, a place where morning might break forth and you'd want to be part of that morning. They established that church 200 years ago. And do you think they were welcomed in town? No, sirree. Nope. Other churches wanted nothing to do with them. They didn't want to have, in fact, they tried to buy land at one point, and the owner said, I won't sell to you people. The very lack of a creed meant most people thought they weren't a religion. We deal with that today. In a day in which either the Apostles' Creed or a Nicene Creed or Disciples' Creed is said every Sunday word for word, the Universalists weren't doing that. So how could they be a religion? Instead, they wanted to talk about ideas, about worth, about possibility, about collective action. Now, I would be untruthful if I were to tell you that that church thrived in the next 50 years. There were a lot of ups and downs, a lot of it financial, a lot of it caused by interruptions from outside forces. But that's the heritage we draw from. If I'm going to draw from some spring of inspiration, that's the kind I want to draw from. The kind where all of us here today would be welcome back then. And we'd be free because of that freedom clause to believe our own beliefs. No one would put words in your mouth you didn't agree with. I will accept that heritage. Will you? Would you accept that as part of who you are being here? Now, I want to jump ahead 50 years. I'm going to bypass a bunch of history here, of all those ups and downs in which at one point they had no money, but then all of a sudden somebody gave them money and all kinds of other stuff, building churches and losing churches and meeting in various places. It was a little event, what we down in the South used to call the recent unpleasantness, that happened in the 1860s. The Civil War was not good for Universalism. Let's be honest about that. They had been preaching the inherent goodness of all people. But how do you look at the battlefield of Antietam or of Gettysburg or Chancellorsburg? How do you look at the waste of human life and think that there is anything good about human condition? The surge that had been Universalism rising up before the Civil War was suddenly doused in a moment in those terrible battles, family against family, brother against brother, state against state, commonwealth against commonwealth. But still this congregation held on, and held on to their central image of themselves. I want to take you 50 years up to 1876. Does the name Robert Ingersoll mean anything to anyone here? Robert Ingersoll. Well, in 1876, you would have known his name. He was the most prominent agnostic in America. He was right out there preaching that we can never know with certainty any religious principle, any nature of God, anything about Jesus, whatever. And Ingersoll was on the lecture circuit. You know, that's used to, now we have movies and now we have whatever and hockey. But those days, the big thing in town might be a lecture. And Ingersoll was going to come to Utica. No one would have him. They wasn't available to go to the Mechanics Hall or the Masonic Hall, to go to the Presbyterian Church or the Episcopal Church, certainly not. But the Universalist welcomed him in to speak. That's your heritage. That's my heritage. That this congregation said, we may not agree with everything he says, but every person has a right to be heard to speak. And where we disagree, we'll disagree in love, but where we agree, we'll be encouraged. Think about that. What's going on in our country, the whole struggles to come back together as a nation. At that point, there was a second resurgence of religious conservatism that was trying to assert itself after the Civil War. And the Universalists said to this well-known freethinker, come. Don't just talk. Talk from our pulpit. Talk where it makes power and sense. So we see the beginnings 200 years ago, and we see the fruits of that spirit 150 years ago. How about 100 years ago? What was going on 100 years ago? We're now up to 1926. Something happened in this congregation that was at least a quarter century earlier than anyone else got up to it. At a meeting of the congregation, they voted to welcome in Unitarians. Now, you may not know what the significance of that is, but they often had been at odds with each other. In the Lawrence Mill strike, back in the early part of the 20th century, the mill owners were Unitarian, the mill workers were supported by Universalists. The Universalists hired a train to take the women and children out of Lawrence, and the mill owners tried to stop that train, the Unitarians. So the Unitarians, the Universalists often didn't get along. Down in Cedarville, all of you know where Cedarville is? Anybody recognize Cedarville? There used to be a Universalist church there. It went into decline in the early part of the 20th century because they had a guest speaker who spoke there often, and they found he was double dipping. He was being paid by them and by the Unitarian Church nationally. And the church split. If you go down to Cedarville today, you'll find there's no Universalist church. But you'll see a building marked the People's Undenominational Chapel. Hear those words, undenominational. Now, Unitarians and Universalists often didn't get along. There were different classes. They had a different philosophy about who was included in the circle. They had a different understanding of women voting in church matters. But the Universalists, seeing what the future required, seeing that a common liberal religious front was what was needed in this world, voted to welcome in without any exclusion the Unitarians who were meeting in Utica, and to change the name of the church to the Church of the Reconciliation, Universalist it had been, the Church of the Reconciliation, Universalist Unitarian. In that one vote, the circle was widened. Because where maybe the Universalists were the people of heart, the Unitarians were people of thought. Where the Universalists may have been the people of the common, the Unitarians were more of an upper strata. And together, they had both strains, and they had to talk to each other. They had to work this out. They had to be together. What an amazing thing. That's your heritage. That's my heritage from 100 years ago, when this church, this congregation, chose to merge Unitarians and Universalists 30-some years before the national group would even think of such a thing. We were there. So when I was growing up, and we talk about Unitarians and Universalists together, 1950s, they were still separate. And we're all like, no, they're not separate. We're from Utica. There was Utica pride in that, I'll tell you. It was wonderful. Then let's go up another 50 years. 1976. What was going on for this congregation in 1976? I'll tell you. That had become an albatross. That big 1907 building, as wonderful and sort of mystical to be in, with all sorts of nooks and crannies and hidden attics and shuffleboard court in the bottom level. It was too expensive to maintain. Picture trying to heat something that tall off a boiler system, which on Sunday mornings when it would get going, one could hear from the boiler this sound. It would be coming closer and closer until it finally hit the radiators. Bang! It made worship kind of interesting. And it was then, 1976, that this congregation voted that it was time to once more move on. Sell the old building, build a new building. Build one that would be more ecologically sound. Build one that was more in keeping with the spirit of things. And so they went for a temporary time to another congregation, rented space, and then they moved here, onto this lot. This lot was covered with overgrowth. There was an old cellar hole sitting over there, but it was cleared, it was filled, it was taken care of, and then this building was built. Not designed by architects, designed by members of the congregation who said, what do we want the new home to be? What do we want to have included? We don't have to need someone to come in to tell us. We need to tell them. And also they consulted with one of the contractors in the area who also built the friendly restaurants in the area, who said, if you use regular dimensional lumber, you'll save a fortune. You don't need something more than 8 feet. You only need exactly 8 feet. And you need insulation in the walls, and you need this and that. So they put together their dreams, together with a pragmatism. And then they turned to an architect at the end and said, now make it pretty. This was supposed to be a solid wall. The architect said you could change the room immensely by just putting 2 feet of projection out there and letting some light come in, and put the windows up there. And so what you're living in is a house decided on 50 years ago by the people of the congregation, not by some diocesan leader, not by some one wealthy person, but by all the people of the congregation, informed by Becker's practice and enlivened by a bit of art and beauty. That's because the people back then, just as the people in 26, and the people in 76, and the people in 1825, had dared to go against what everyone would have told them. What they would have told them in 1825 is, you're not wanted here. 1876 just says, we don't need the kind that lets him speak. In 1926, some would have said, you can just go to alone as Universalists. In 1976, they could have said, you know, you're a dying church, why not just sell the assets and go away? But there were people who dared in each of those times to decide that this congregation being here was more important than any doubt, any fear, any trouble they might get into. That kind of trouble is the kind of trouble you want to get into. And they made the choices so that we could be here today. But that means that there is a heritage. There is a legacy. There's something that's there that you are holding in trust for those people 200 years ago, 150 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and that is this congregation. You're holding in trust their spirit, their daring, courageous spirit, to say it's important that this message of liberal religion be here in Utica. You know, back in 1976, one of the questions was, well, maybe we should follow the population trends and locate outside the city. And they dared to say, if we're going to be meaningful to the city, we need to be in the city. Daring. Don't you think it must have been daring to say we're going to let women vote in 1825? Don't you think it was daring to say a controversial speaker should always have a place where they may speak? Don't you think it's daring when you're willing to give up half of your name to join with another unit, with the Unitarians, so you're combined together? Don't you think it's daring to give up a church that has served you for 70 years and you have no idea what it's going to be like at the end of the process, but you go ahead because you can do no other? That's the charge to you, to each of us, to all of us, to be those kind of daring people that do not let 200 years of history be history, but rather be the instruction sheet for what we do today. It be the commandment, as it were, to go forth and do likewise, to be as daring as they were. And so now the question is, how daring will you be? What will you dare to do in the name of Unitarian Universalism? How daring are you willing to be when all those appear to be construed against you, but you know that your liberal thoughts are important? How daring will you be when you count up the numbers and realize that in the wonderful world of Greater Utica, we are but a handful? But what a handful we have always been. And when you feel like your courage is waning, when you feel like somehow maybe you don't dare again, just take up the thought of all those people who came before you, who made a difference, and then you'll do what you need to do because they dared. We're about to sing a hymn, number 318, We Would Be One. And I want to give some context to this. This hymn was written in the mid-1950s. It was written as the hymn where the Unitarian and the Universalist national youth groups came together to form Liberal Religious Youth. This is 5 years before the adults could get their act together. But the youth came together, and this was their proclamation, their values, their vision, their covenant to one another as young Unitarian Universalists. 318, we would be one.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our heart and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves in great service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Please be seated. I promised at the beginning that we'd raise up a question at the end. The order of service this morning is not the one you typically experience here, but this was typical 70 years ago. What's changed? Chalice, no chalice lighting. That's right, we didn't light chalices back in those days. That began to grow somewhat in the late 60s and further on, but otherwise we have. So why don't we light it? Good idea? In honor of the fact that even our worship can change. Come on. Come on. You can do it. Oh, maybe a small light, but... So what else didn't we do this morning that we usually do? Tell a story. We didn't tell any kid's story, did we? That didn't used to happen. Sing, we sang. We do that. We haven't heard any announcements yet, have we? They didn't used to make announcements back in the day, but I believe there are several.
Let's see here. Our bicentennial celebration continues next Sunday with Reverend Eve Stevens returning to us. There will be that service on the Sunday with also Peg Spencer Barron as our musician. Tim Barron, our minister emeritus, will be here. So please come next week. There is a community dinner Friday night. Eve, coming all the way from North Carolina, wanted an opportunity to spend more time with the congregation. So we have arranged a community dinner Friday night. Please come. That's at 6 p.m. Sign up to bring something if you can. Bring something if you can. Jack Pendrak is coordinating. We need folks to help with hospitality going forward. The signups are good until the last Sunday in November, but we need coffee hour and hospitality people for that. We need greeters sooner than that. So please look at the list by the back door. Next week's plate collection goes to the Food Bank of Central New York for obvious reasons. Please bring a generous donation with you if possible. If for some reason you need to send in your contributions, checks can be made out to UU Utica. Just let us know if you send it in that it's for the food bank. The blessings basket in back is for hats, gloves, mittens, cold weather gear for kids. This is our second annual cold weather collection for those folks. How's that?
Good. What?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Katie. Inclusion team meeting in the Oak Room following the service once we get our snacks.
Well, it's pretty apparent that we offended the chalice flame. Because normally we would extinguish it. And we'd remind ourselves that our time together is now complete, but our time of going out in the world to serve others begins. Oh.
I can hold that. All right.
I'll hold it.
Here we go.
I don't want to curse the darkness, so I'll hold it. And that we take with us the warmth of our fellowship and the power of our commitment and the light of our knowing out into the world until we are together again. And so the benediction, the words for going forth well, each of us here. Each of us, whether this is our first Sunday here or our 1000th Sunday, we hold a heritage in us that is at least 200 years old in this city, that calls to us to not forget that they dared so that we in our time can dare to dream of, to work for, to make a better world. Blessing be, and amen. I feel tempted to say, you played it for her, you can play it for me. Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by.
Thank you. Hospitality to follow. Let me just mention our library has its newest edition. Sarah Miller has donated her mom's book. Jennifer Boulanger, who spoke here several months ago, has donated this book with an inscription. The inscription says, where did you go? It says, to the Unitarian Universalist Church members, let Olaf inspire you to live with joy. Hearts full of empathy. Jennifer Boulanger. Let me also mention we have two authors in our presence. Barbara Lindsley has some books that you'll see here from time to time. And Mr. Randolph Becker here is the author of 6 books, and in the newsletter we'll have a link to...
Oh, good, yeah. The newest one's called Perryburg, and it's about an anonymous Rust Belt city.